They harassed a woman in a wheelchair, threatened the locals at Paradise Point Diner, and terrorized a peaceful Maine coastal town. But the Crimson Riders were about to learn the most devastating lesson of their lives. Behind that serene smile and those steady hands sat a legend, Commander Sarah Steele Hawthorne, one of the Navy's most decorated special operations commanders, whose classified missions had earned her honors that remained sealed in Pentagon vaults. For 2 weeks, they pushed her, taunted her, never realizing they were challenging someone who had commanded elite teams through the world's deadliest waters. Then came the signal. Within hours, over 50 hardened veterans would descend on Harbor Cove, men and women who'd served under Hawthorne in operations that would never see the light of day. But what happened next wasn't the bloodbath everyone expected. Instead, Harbor Cove witnessed something far more powerful, a story of honor, redemption, and the kind of strength that transforms bitter enemies into loyal protectors. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit subscribe and ring that notification bell, because tomorrow's episode will absolutely blow your mind. The autumn breeze carried salt and seaweed through Harbor Cove's narrow streets as Paradise Point Diner came alive for another morning. Lucy Chen arranged coffee cups with practiced precision, her movements reflecting years of morning rituals in this small coastal sanctuary. The aroma of fresh-baked blueberry muffins mixed with the scent of brewing coffee, creating the familiar comfort that had made her diner the heart of the community. The bell above the door chimed precisely at 7:15 a.m. as Commander Sarah Hawthorne wheeled herself through the entrance, her movements smooth and controlled. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her posture military straight despite the wheelchair. Lucy approached with a warm smile, already reaching for the commander's regular morning coffee. "Morning, Commander," she said, leading the way to the corner table by the window. "Just pulled those cinnamon rolls you like out of the oven." Sarah's weathered face creased with a gentle smile. "Thank you, Lucy. How's Tommy doing with those college applications?" The diner slowly filled with its morning regulars. Helen Park from Lighthouse Books, nodding respectfully as she passed with a stack of morning newspapers. Old Joe from the fishing pier, his boots still damp from the early morning catch. Mayor Patricia Wells arranging fresh flowers from her garden in the window display. Each person carried their own story, their own connection to this quiet corner of Maine. Lucy emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd owned Paradise Point for 25 years, serving meals and memories to generations of Harbor Cove residents. Her eyes softened at the sight of Sarah, remembering the day 3 years ago when the commander had first wheeled through her door, newly returned from an operation that had cost her the use of her legs, but none of her commanding presence. Outside, Sheriff Diana Martinez's patrol car cruised past, slowing slightly as she scanned the area. Something had the local law enforcement on edge lately. Lucy refilled Sarah's coffee, noting how the commander's head tilted slightly at the sound of motorcycles in the distance. "Quite a few new faces in town lately," Lucy mentioned casually, watching for Sarah's response. Commander Hawthorne's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, a habit Lucy had noticed whenever she was processing information. "Yes," she replied quietly. "The tide brings in all sorts, Lucy. Not all of them welcome." The rumble of motorcycles grew louder, then faded as they passed the outskirts of town. Dr. James Cooper's car pulled into his usual spot across the street, the VA physician's experienced eyes lingering on the diner longer than usual. The peace of Harbor Cove felt somehow fragile this morning, like the calm before a nor'easter. Helen approached Sarah's table, her morning ritual unchanged for years. "These are for you, Commander," she said, placing a small vase of fresh beach roses on the table. "Found them growing wild by the lighthouse. Reminded me of resilience." Sarah reached out, her fingers gently touching the soft petals. "Thank you, Helen. They smell like hope." If you're enjoying this story of strength and redemption, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next when the Crimson Riders make their first move. Leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. The morning sun struggled through heavy clouds as Harbor Cove's lighthouse cast long shadows across the town's weathered boardwalk. The peaceful morning shattered with the rumble of approaching motorcycles, their chrome gleaming despite the overcast sky. The Crimson Riders had arrived in force, their reputation preceding them like storm clouds before a hurricane. Marcus Reaper Blackwood led the formation, his massive black motorcycle cutting through the morning quiet like a blade through silk. Behind him rode his inner circle, Jake Viper Reynolds, scanning the streets with predatory focus. Lisa Raven Winters, her golden bike reflecting the dim light. Ryan Shadow Pierce, taking mental notes of every business they passed. And Derek Thunder Collins, whose fingers never strayed far from his concealed weapons. Inside Paradise Point Diner, the regular morning crowd fell silent as the motorcycles approached. Lucy Chen's hand trembled slightly as she poured coffee, her eyes meeting Sarah Hawthorne's across the room. The commander sat at her usual corner table, her posture unchanged but her attention sharp, mapping every sound, every movement with military precision. The bell above the door chimed as Blackwood and his inner circle entered, leather cuts creaking, boots heavy on the worn floor. The air seemed to thicken with tension as other customers drew back, trying to make themselves invisible. "Well, well," Blackwood's voice carried across the diner, deep and theatrical. "Quaint little place you've got here." Lucy stepped forward, her voice steady despite her fear. "Welcome to Paradise Point. Coffee's fresh if you're interested." Blackwood ignored her, his attention drawn to Sarah's corner. He nudged Reynolds, nodding toward the wheelchair-bound veteran. "Check out the hero in the corner. Guess they let anyone in here these days." Commander Hawthorne continued eating her breakfast, her movements deliberate and controlled, years of naval discipline evident in every motion, though few would recognize it for what it was. "Sir," Lucy approached Blackwood's group, professional, despite her unease. "There's a larger table available if you'd like to be seated." "Shadow, Raven," Blackwood called to his lieutenants, ignoring Lucy. "Let's get a closer look at our disabled friend here." They moved toward Sarah's table, their reflections growing larger in the diner's windows. The other customers watched, in horrified silence, memories of news reports about the Crimson Riders' activities in other coastal towns fresh in their minds. "Nice wheels," Reynolds leaned over the table. "Military discount or charity case?" Sarah set down her fork with naval precision. "They serve their purpose." Her voice carried no fear, no anger, just calm certainty that made Blackwood's eyes narrow slightly. Outside, Sheriff Martinez's patrol car rolled past the diner, slowing as she noted the collection of motorcycles. She spoke quietly into her radio, her experienced eyes taking in the scene through the windows. "You know what I think?" Blackwood pulled out a chair, spinning it around to sit backwards at Sarah's table. "I think a woman like you needs to learn her place in the new order. Harbor Cove's changing, sweetheart. Best learn that quick." Sarah's hands remained steady on the table, her breath even. "Every sailor learns what they're capable of learning, Mr. Blackwood. Some lessons are harder than others." Blackwood's face darkened at the use of his name. "You know who I am?" "Your reputation precedes you," Sarah replied calmly. "Though reputations aren't always accurate measures of a person's worth." Lucy moved closer to the table, coffee pot in hand, her grip white-knuckled, the pot ready to become a weapon if needed. But Sarah's slight headshake stopped her, a gesture so subtle only someone watching for it would notice. "Boss," Shadow called from near the window, "we've got company." Sheriff Martinez entered the diner, her steps measured, one hand resting casually near her holster. "Quite a collection of bikes you've got out there. Hope you're not planning an extended stay in Harbor Cove." Blackwood stood slowly, his leather cut creaking. "Just passing through, Sheriff. Getting to know the locals." His gaze lingered on Sarah, some more interesting than others. "Then I suggest you pass through quickly." Martinez's voice carried the weight of authority backed by law. "Harbor Cove's a peaceful town. We'd like to keep it that way." The tension stretched like a fishing line about to snap. Then Blackwood laughed, the sound lacking any real humor. "Of course, Sheriff. We respect the law." He turned to his crew. "Come on, plenty of time to get acquainted with our new friends." As the Crimson Riders filed out, Blackwood paused at Sarah's table. "We'll talk again soon, Commander. Count on it." The bell chimed as they left, the sound of motorcycles growing louder, then fading as they rode away. The diner remained silent. For several long moments, the morning peace shattered like sea glass on rocks. "Sarah," Lucy approached, her voice shaking slightly. "Are you all right?"
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Fine, Lucy." She reached for her coffee cup, her movement still perfectly controlled, though something in her eyes had changed, like the sea before a storm. "Though I believe Harbor Cove's about to experience some interesting times." Sheriff R. Martinez watched the motorcycles disappear down Main Street, her face grim. "Commander, a word when you have a moment." Outside, clouds continued to gather, darker now. The thunder that rolled across Harbor Cove was real this time, nature's own warning of the storm to come. But in Paradise Point Diner, as Lucy watched, Sarah's calm demeanor and steady hands, she couldn't help but wonder if the Crimson Riders had just made their first serious mistake. If you're finding this story intense, just wait until you see what happens next. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Tomorrow's episode reveals Commander Hawthorne's classified past and the moment that changes everything. Drop a comment below telling us what you think will happen when the Crimson Riders learn who they're really dealing with. The afternoon sun struggled through steel-gray clouds as Sheriff Diana Martinez's patrol car wound its way up the rocky coastline to Commander Hawthorne's historic Victorian home. The house stood like an old lighthouse keeper's watch, overlooking Harbor Cove from its perch above the churning Atlantic. Sarah sat in her wheelchair on the wraparound porch, facing the approaching vehicle as if she'd been expecting it. "You knew I was coming?" Martinez remarked, climbing the worn steps. "Your cruiser has a distinctive knock in the engine," Sarah replied, gesturing to a nearby rocking chair. "Might want to have that checked, Diana." Martinez settled into the offered seat, her uniform crisp despite the late hour. "Those weren't ordinary bikers this morning, Sarah. My contacts in state police say the Crimson Riders have taken over 3 coastal towns in the last 6 months. Protection rackets, intimidation, violence. They're professionals at causing trouble." Sarah's fingers traced the arm of her wheelchair, the movement deliberate. "And you're worried about how a woman in a wheelchair might handle their attention?" "I'm worried about what happens when they push too hard." Martinez leaned forward. "Your Navy record may be classified, Commander, but I've got friends in high places. I know enough to know you're not as helpless as you appear." The wind stirred. Fallen leaves across the porch as Sarah considered her response. "Everyone in Harbor Cove is helpless if we don't stand together, Diana. That's what they don't understand yet." Downtown, the Crimson Riders were making their presence known. Jake Viper Reynolds and Lisa Raven Winters walked into Helen Park's Lighthouse Books, their leather cuts and heavy boots incongruous among the neat shelves and reading nooks. "Nice place you got here," Reynolds commented, deliberately knocking over a display of local authors. "Shame if anything happened to it." At the VA clinic, Dr. James Cooper reviewed Sarah's file, his concern evident as he spoke on the phone. "Yes, I understand the confidentiality issues, but if the Crimson Riders are targeting her, I know her history. I treated her after the Persian Gulf incident." Sarah's home phone rang, the specialized system announcing Rachel Hawthorne before she answered. "Mom," her daughter's voice carried worry across the miles. "I just heard about the bikers. Maybe you should come stay with me in Boston for a while." "This is my home, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her voice gentle but firm. "Running isn't the answer." At the town hall, Deputy Sam Wilson burst into Martinez's office, clutching a stack of papers. "Sheriff, you need to see this. State Police. Reports on the Crimson Riders. They're not just another biker gang. They've got military-grade weapons, organized structure. Blackwood was Navy himself before he was dishonorably discharged. Evening settled over Harbor Cove like a heavy fog. Lucy wiped down the diner counters after closing, the routine familiar but somehow ominous in the empty restaurant. The bell chimed, making her freeze. "We're closed," she called out, turning to find Thunder Collins and Shadow Pierce standing in her diner. "Just wanting to discuss business opportunities," Collins smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Protection services, you might say. These days, small businesses need all the help they can get." Across town, Sarah sat in her darkened living room, phone in hand, contemplating a number she hadn't used in years. Behind her, displayed in a shadow box she rarely acknowledged but always knew was there, hung medals that told only part of her story. Martinez's patrol car rolled past the diner just as the bikers were leaving. Lucy's hands shook as she locked up, her mind made up. Tomorrow she'd tell Sarah everything. But Sarah already knew. She'd heard the entire exchange through the phone line she'd never disconnected after their earlier call. In the Crimson Riders' temporary camp at the old cannery, Blackwood studied photos of Harbor Cove's businesses, marking potential targets. But his focus kept returning to the image of Sarah Hawthorne. Something about the wheelchair-bound veteran nagged at his instincts, like a warning he couldn't quite hear. Dr. Cooper worked late at the VA clinic, pulling more files, making more calls. His computer screen displayed a heavily redacted mission report from the Persian Gulf. Only one line was fully visible. Commander Hawthorne's actions during the incident remained classified at the highest levels. The night deepened over Harbor Cove as storm clouds gathered again. In her home, Sarah moved through familiar rooms with perfect precision, her fingers brushing past photographs she kept face down, but could never bring herself to store away. One photo, hidden behind the others, showed her standing on a naval vessel's bridge, surrounded by a team whose faces had been carefully blurred before release. That mission would never see the light of day, but its lessons were about to become very relevant. Tomorrow would bring choices. Tomorrow would force hands and reveal truths. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of her home, Commander Sarah Hawthorne prepared herself for what she knew was coming. Not with weapons or plans of violence, but with the steady resolve that had once made her a legend in waters whose names she could never speak. The storm was building, both in the clouds above and in the hearts of those below. Harbor Cove stood on the brink of something that would change it forever, and at the center of it all sat a veteran who saw more clearly than anyone what was truly at stake. If this story of hidden strength and coming storms has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Tomorrow's episode reveals the classified mission that earned Commander Hawthorne her highest honors, and the shocking connection to one of the Crimson Riders that changes everything. Leave a comment telling us what you think that connection might be. The morning fog clung to Harbor Cove's docks like a shroud as Commander Sarah Hawthorne's wheelchair cut through the mist, her path to Paradise Point Diner as straight as ever despite the limited visibility. The Crimson Riders had spent 3 days establishing their presence in town, their intimidation growing bolder with each passing hour. Today would be different. Sarah had sensed it in the air, in the subtle changes of sound around her, in the way vehicles slowed as they passed. Blackwood sat on his motorcycle across the street, watching the commander's approach. 3 days of digging had yielded nothing but questions. No social media presence, no easily accessible military records, just whispered rumors and dead ends. The fog swirled around him as he gunned his engine, the sound deliberately aggressive. "Right on schedule," Blackwood muttered to Reynolds beside him. "Like clockwork. Woman's got Navy discipline written all over her." Inside the diner, Lucy's hands shook slightly as she arranged Sarah's silverware. The bell chimed as the commander entered, but the usual morning greeting died in her throat as 5 Crimson Riders followed immediately behind her. The diner fell silent, the handful of early customers freezing in place. "Quite an escort you've got today," Lucy called from behind the counter, her voice steady despite her fear. Sarah wheeled to her usual corner table, her movements unchanged by the biker's presence. Blackwood pulled up a chair at Sarah's table, his leather cut creaking. "Been doing some asking around about you, Commander. Interesting things people don't say when your name comes up, like they're afraid to talk about certain operations." "Most people talk too much anyway," Sarah replied, her hands finding her coffee cup with practiced ease. "Present company included." The door chimed again as Dr. James Cooper entered, his white coat pristine in the dim diner light. He faltered for just a moment at the scene before him, then moved purposefully toward Sarah's table. Blackwood's hand shot out, blocking his path. "Doctors making house calls now?" he sneered, reading Cooper's name tag. "How touching." "VA, business," Cooper replied firmly. "Protected by federal law. I suggest you move your hand." Outside, a sleek black SUV parked across the street, its windows tinted. Inside, Captain Michael Ghost O'Brien watched the scene unfold through high-powered D optics, his scarred hands steady on the binoculars. His phone lay ready beside him, a number already dialed, but not yet called. "Mom?" Rachel Hawthorne's voice cut through the tension as she appeared in the doorway, her Boston legal firm's briefcase clutched tightly. She hadn't told Sarah she was coming, hadn't wanted her to talk her out of it. Blackwood's eyes shifted between Sarah and Rachel, a predatory smile spreading across his face. Well, family reunion. Boys, make sure our guests are comfortable." Shadow Pierce and Thunder Collins moved to flank the door. Raven Winters positioned herself near the counter, while Jake Reynolds lingered near the kitchen entrance. The tactical positioning wasn't lost on Sarah, whose head tilted slightly as she mapped their movements by sound. "Rachel." Sarah's voice remained calm. "I believe you're late for an appointment." "Not this time, Mom," she replied, moving toward her mother's table, despite Reynolds' attempt to intimidate her with his bulk. "Grandma didn't raise a coward, and neither did you." At the sheriff's office, Deputy Sam Wilson burst in with a manila envelope. "Sheriff, you need to see this. Just came in from Naval Intelligence. Blackwood's discharge wasn't just dishonorable. It was after an operation in the Gulf went bad. Same operation. Same time Commander Hawthorne was there." Martinez finished his sentence, reaching for her keys. "Call Dr. Cooper now." Dr. Cooper stood his ground near Sarah's table, his medical bag clutched tightly. Inside it, beneath normal medical supplies, lay a file he'd spent all night compiling. A file that explained exactly why targeting Sarah Hawthorne was the biggest mistake the Crimson Riders could make. "You know what I can't figure out?" Blackwood leaned closer to Sarah, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "How a crippled sailor rates a VA doctor making personal house calls. How she affords a Victorian house on a disability pension. How she moves like someone who never forgot their training." The morning sun finally broke through the fog, sending shadows dancing across the diner's worn floor. Sarah's hands remained steady on her coffee cup, but Rachel noticed the subtle shift in her posture, a change so slight only someone who knew her would recognize it. "Mr. Blackwood," Sarah spoke quietly, "I'm going to give you one chance to walk away. Not because I'm afraid, but because what happens next might remind you of things you'd rather forget. The Persian Gulf, for instance." Blackwood's face went white, then red with fury. "How do you know about—" His hand shot out to grab Sarah's collar, but froze mid-motion as the commander's head turned to face him with unsettling precision. "The same way I know Raven just reached for her knife by the counter," Sarah continued calmly. "The same way I know Shadow's carrying a weapon he's not licensed for. The same way I know you've got 3 more men outside besides the 2 by your bikes." The diner fell completely silent. Even the usual morning harbor sound seemed muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Blackwood's hand trembled slightly, still frozen in mid-reach. "Mom," Rachel's voice carried a warning. "Your phone's ringing." Indeed, A specialized ringtone emanated from Sarah's pocket, a tone she hadn't heard in years. Outside, Captain O'Brien's finger hovered over the call button in his SUV, ready to summon forces Blackwood couldn't imagine. "Last chance," Sarah said softly. "Walk away. Find another town to terrorize. Because if you don't, I'll be forced to make a phone call, and believe me, Mr. Blackwood, you don't want me to make that call. If this confrontation has your heart." Racing. Just wait until tomorrow's episode when we reveal the classified mission that binds Commander Hawthorne and Blackwood together, and the moment that changes everything. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Drop a comment below telling us what you think happened in the Persian Gulf. Sheriff Martinez's cruiser pulled up outside Paradise Point Diner, followed by 2 state police vehicles. Through the windows, they could see Dr. Cooper opening his medical bag, pulling out not medical supplies, but a file stamped with top secret markings in faded red ink. "You're bluffing," Blackwood snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're just a broken-down sailor playing at being dangerous." Sarah's lips curved in a slight smile. "Then why are you sweating, Mr. Blackwood? Why did your heart rate spike? When I mentioned the Gulf, why are you suddenly remembering whispered warnings about a certain naval commander whose missions there will remain classified for 50 more years?" The morning sun broke fully through the fog, streaming through Paradise Point's windows. In that bright light, Blackwood finally saw what he'd missed before. Behind those calm eyes, beneath the peaceful exterior, sat a woman who had once been legend in waters, where legends got you killed. "Boss!" Shadow called urgently from the counter. "We got company, lots of company." Through the windows they could see vehicles arriving, not just police but black SUVs with government plates, men in suits mixed with others who moved with unmistakable military precision. Captain O'Brien stepped out of his vehicle, his scarred face familiar to Blackwood from briefings long ago. "Times like these," Sarah said quietly, "a person has to decide what kind of future they want. The kind that comes from pushing people around, or the kind that comes from finding a better way." The Crimson Riders' leader stood slowly, his leather cut suddenly feeling heavy on his shoulders. In Commander Hawthorne's calm voice, he heard echoes of helicopter rotors and shouted orders, of missions that would never see the light of day. "This isn't over," Blackwood managed, but the threat sounded hollow, even to his own ears. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood," Sarah replied. "It is. The only question is how it ends. You decide." At the VA clinic, Dr. Cooper spread photographs across Martinez's desk, medical records from the Gulf, heavily redacted mission reports, and one clear photograph of a younger Sarah Hawthorne receiving a medal that officially didn't exist. "The mission that cost her legs," Cooper explained, his voice low, "saved 32 lives, including Blackwood's unit. He just doesn't remember because of the trauma. She was already paralyzed when she guided that last rescue boat to safety." Rachel worked her legal magic, turning the diner into a temporary command center. Her laptop displayed federal regulations and statutes as she coordinated with state authorities. "The Crimson Riders have violated multiple federal laws," she explained to Sheriff Martinez. "But Mom doesn't want them destroyed. She wants them rehabilitated." Captain O'Brien's network was already in motion. Veterans from 3 states were quietly converging on Harbor Cove, not for violence, but to stand ready if needed. Each one owed Commander Hawthorne a debt that no amount of time could erase. Jake Reynolds found Blackwood behind the cannery, the gang leader's usual confidence noticeably shaken. "Boss, something's not right. That wheelchair-bound commander, the way she knew where everyone was standing, how she moved. I've seen that before, in operators who've been through the real stuff." Through the afternoon light came the rumble of more motorcycles as additional Crimson Riders arrived at their makeshift camp, but there was uncertainty in their movements now. Whispered conversations carried on the wind, the story of the morning's confrontation growing with each retelling. "Heard she was naval special warfare," one biker muttered. "Nah, darker than that," another replied. "Black Ops stuff. The kind of missions that never happened." Lucy Chen stood in her diner's doorway, watching Crimson Riders pass with less swagger than before. The morning's events had changed something. When Shadow Pierce tried to enter for coffee, she met him with steady eyes. "You want coffee?" she asked calmly. "Fine, but in my diner, you're just men. Leave the intimidation outside." To everyone's surprise, Pierce removed his cut before entering. The simple act sent ripples through the watching gang members. At the VA clinic, Dr. Cooper received calls from military contacts across the country. "It's starting," he told Sarah over a secure line. "Blackwood's full record is surfacing. He's not just any dishonorably discharged sailor. He's someone you saved, someone who lost his way." Sarah sat in her garden, the afternoon sun warm on her face as Rachel read reports from her legal contacts. "The state's preparing a RICO case," she explained. "But there might be another way, Mom. A way to save them instead of destroying them." Blackwood paced the cannery's empty interior, memories flooding back. Flashes of fire and seawater, of a voice in the darkness commanding them to live, of hands guiding them to safety. He'd buried those memories under years of anger and violence, but they were surfacing now, demanding to be acknowledged. Reynolds approached Blackwood cautiously. "Boss, we got word from other chapters. They're hearing stories about Commander Hawthorne, big stories, the kind that make hard men nervous. If you thought this revelation was intense, just wait until tomorrow's episode when we show you exactly what happened that night in the Persian Gulf and why Blackwood's men are about to face a choice that will change everything. Hit subscribe now and don't miss a moment of this incredible story. Tell us in the comments, what do you think really happened on that classified mission?" In town, the atmosphere had shifted. Where Crimson Riders had swaggered yesterday, today, they moved with uncertainty, understanding that the tide was turning. Captain O'Brien's SUV cruised past the cannery, his scarred face visible to Blackwood through the fence, a reminder of other sailors who had lost their way but found redemption. The message was clear. There were second chances for those willing to take them. Sarah's phone rang, a secure line from her past. "The dominoes are falling," her old admiral reported. "Blackwood's full record is being unsealed. He needs to know the truth about the Gulf, about what you did for his men." Rachel watched her mother's face as she absorbed the news. "You're not just going to stop them, are you, Mom? You're going to save them." "Everyone deserves a chance to find their way home," Sarah replied softly. "Even those who've forgotten, they're lost." At the cannery, Blackwood discovered old mission briefings in his personal files. Headlines about a classified operation, about a legendary commander who stayed at her post even after the explosion, guiding rescue boats until all were saved. The dates matched his nightmares, the ones he'd drowned in alcohol and violence for years. The memories came flooding back now, impossible to stop. 12 years ago, Persian Gulf. The night was moonless, the waters black as ink. Lieutenant Marcus Blackwood's tactical team was trapped on a disabled vessel, taking heavy fire from multiple directions. The radio crackled with static and desperate calls for help. "This is Commander Hawthorne," a steady voice cut through the chaos. "All units converge on my coordinates. We're getting our people out." Through his night vision goggles, Blackwood saw the rescue vessel approaching, expertly navigating the treacherous waters. Commander Sarah Hawthorne stood at the helm, calling out positions, coordinating the extraction with surgical precision. The first explosion rocked the night, sending shrapnel tearing through the command vessel. Blackwood watched in horror as Sarah took the blast but remained standing, continuing to direct rescue operations even as blood soaked her uniform. "Get those men aboard!" Her voice never wavered. "That's an order." The second explosion came. As they were transferring the last team members, Blackwood saw Sarah thrown against the bulkhead, heard the sickening crack, but still she kept commanding, kept guiding, even after her legs had given out. "Commander's hit!" someone screamed. "Continue the extraction." Sarah's voice remained steady despite her injuries. "Get our people home." The last thing Blackwood remembered was Sarah's hands, steady despite everything, guiding the helm as she brought them to safety. Then darkness took him, and when he woke in the hospital, the memories were buried under trauma and medication. Present day. Lucy closed the diner early, but not before witnessing something remarkable. 3 Crimson Riders had eaten lunch there, peaceful and respectful, their cuts left on their bikes. The change was starting, one small gesture at a time. Sheriff Martinez met with town council members, explaining the shifting situation. "This isn't just about law enforcement anymore," she said. "This is about redemption. Commander Hawthorne's playing a longer game than any of us realized." As evening approached, Blackwood found himself driving to the local library, using a computer to search for information he'd been afraid to face. Articles about post-traumatic stress, about veterans losing their way, about programs for rehabilitation. His hands trembled on the keyboard. The sun set over Harbor Cove, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Sarah sat on her porch, listening to the changing patterns of motorcycle sounds through her town. The rumble of engines carried less menace now, more uncertainty. "They're fracturing," O'Brien reported, joining Sarah on the porch. "Some want to double down, go harder. Others are remembering who they were before, thanks to you. The question is, which way will Blackwood fall?" Rachel brought coffee to the porch, legal papers tucked under her arm. "The federal prosecutors are offering deals to any who want to clean up, get help. Your reputation's opening doors, Mom." Sarah smiled slightly, hearing the distant sound of motorcycles heading toward the cannery. "Sometimes the strongest men are the ones most lost. Rachel, they build walls of violence and intimidation because they've forgotten how to build bridges of understanding." The night settled over Harbor Cove, but change was already in motion. In the cannery, Blackwood stared at his reflection in a broken window, seeing past the hardened gang leader to the sailor he'd once been, the man who'd been saved by another sailor's sacrifice, only to lose himself in the darkness that followed. Tomorrow would bring more chances for both redemption and ruin. But tonight, in the quiet darkness, the first seeds of transformation were taking root in the most unexpected places, in the hearts of men who had forgotten they were once sailors, of a different kind. If this glimpse into the past moved you, just wait until tomorrow's episode when the truth forces Blackwood to make a choice that will change everything. Hit that subscribe button now. You won't want to miss what happens. Next, leave a comment below. What would you do if someone you once tried to destroy turned out to be the person who saved your life? The morning fog painted Harbor Cove streets in shades of gray as Commander Sarah Hawthorne's wheelchair cut through the mist, her path steady despite the heavy atmosphere. The Crimson Riders had spent 6 days establishing their presence in town. But today the air felt different, charged with possibility. Sarah had sensed the change coming, in the way the motorcycle engines sounded less aggressive, in how their riders moved with growing uncertainty. "They're watching the diner," Captain O'Brien reported from his position across the street. Through his binoculars, he could see Crimson Riders gathering, but their usual intimidating formation had broken down. Some sat apart from the others, cuts unzipped, lost in thought. Inside Paradise Point, Lucy prepared for what she sensed would be a pivotal morning. The bell chimed as Sarah entered, but today she wasn't alone. Rachel Hawthorne and Dr. Cooper flanked her chair, while Sheriff Martinez stood quietly by the counter. They'd planned this moment carefully. "Quite a welcoming committee," Blackwood's voice carried from the doorway, but the usual menace was missing. He entered alone, his cut hanging open, his stance less aggressive. Behind him, his riders waited outside, divided between those urging confrontation and others counseling caution. "Coffee, Mr. Blackwood?" Lucy asked, her voice steady. "It's fresh." To everyone's surprise, he nodded, taking a seat at Sarah's table without waiting for an invitation. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the cup Lucy brought. "That night," he began, his voice rough, "in the Gulf. I've been remembering things, the explosions, the rescue boats, your voice on the radio. staying calm while everything went to hell. Sarah's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, a gesture familiar to everyone who knew her. Sometimes the memories we bury are the ones we need most, Marcus. Outside, more vehicles arrived. Captain O'Brien's network of veterans took up casual positions around the diner, while Crimson Riders gathered in small groups, their usual unity fragmenting as the morning's events unfolded. "Got another group asking about rehabilitation," Rachel reported quietly, showing her mother a message on her phone. "3 more riders want to turn in their cuts, looking for a fresh start." Reynolds burst through the door, his face flushed with anger. "Boss, what are you doing? Half the crew's talking about walking away. Sullivan's got them thinking they can just start over, forget who they are." "No, Jake," Blackwood replied quietly, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "She's got them remembering who they were before, who we all were." Dr. Cooper placed a file on the table between them. Inside lay the full, unredacted report of that night in the Gulf, recently unsealed by naval intelligence. "You weren't just another sailor she saved," Cooper explained gently. "Your team was the reason she stayed at the helm after the first explosion. Even after her legs were gone, she wouldn't abandon her post until every one of you was safe." Through the diner's windows, they could see the division growing among the Crimson Riders. Some removed their cuts, placing them on their bikes. Others argued, gesturing angrily at the diner, at their leader sitting with the very woman they'd come to intimidate. "Your men are choosing, Marcus," Sarah said softly, "between holding on to anger and finding their way home. The question is, what will you choose?" Lucy moved through her diner, serving coffee to everyone, veterans, Crimson Riders, townspeople. Each cup represented possibility, a chance to bridge the divide between who these men had become and who they could be again. "Got the preliminary numbers," Martinez told Rachel quietly. 20 riders already signed up for the Veteran Rehabilitation Program. They're tired of running from their own shadows. Thunder Collins slammed his cut down on the counter, his voice carrying through the diner. "I'm done. Been having nightmares. About Fallujah again. Maybe. Maybe it's time to deal with that instead of trying to bury it under all this." "The thing about buried pain," Sarah responded, her voice gentle but carrying authority, "is that it doesn't stay buried. It comes back as anger, as violence, as the need to make others fear you because you're afraid of what's inside yourself." Blackwood's phone buzzed constantly, messages from other chapters asking about what was happening in Harbor Cove, about the rumors of Commander Hawthorne's identity, about the possibility of redemption. "They said you were dead," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "After the evacuation, when we woke up in the hospital, they told us the commander who saved us didn't make it." "Part of me didn't," Sarah replied, gesturing to her wheelchair. "But the part that matters, the part that knows the difference between strength and power, between fear and respect, that part survived. Just like it survives in you, Marcus. In all of you." Outside, more riders arrived, but not to threaten. These came seeking answers, hope, a way back from the darkness they'd embraced. Captain O'Brien's veterans greeted them not as enemies, but as lost brothers and sisters finding their way home. "We've got support systems in place," Rachel explained, spreading documents across the table. "VA programs, therapy, job training. A chance to rebuild, to heal, to become the protectors you were meant to be. If this moment of truth has touched your heart, wait until tomorrow's episode when Commander Hawthorne reveals the final piece of the puzzle that transforms the Crimson. Riders forever, hit subscribe now and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss this powerful conclusion. Tell us in the comments, what do you think it takes for someone to find their way back from darkness to light? The storm clouds gathered over Harbor Cove as Jake Reynolds paced the floor of an abandoned warehouse 5 miles outside town. Around him, 20 hardline Crimson Riders seethed with anger and betrayal, their cuts gleaming in the dim light, patches marking them as the ones who'd rejected Blackwood's transformation, who'd chosen to double down on violence instead of redemption. Blackwood's lost his mind, Reynolds snarled, throwing a newspaper onto a makeshift table. The headline read, Crimson Riders Leader Supports Veteran Rehabilitation Program. Below it, a photo showed Blackwood sitting with Commander Hawthorne at Paradise Point Diner, both deep in conversation. Back in town, the diner had transformed. Veterans from 3 states filled the tables, sharing coffee and stories with former Crimson Riders who'd turned in their cuts. The smell of Lucy's fresh-baked bread mixed with the sound of men and women finding their way back to who they used to be. "Never thought I'd see this," Captain O'Brien remarked to Sarah, watching Blackwood help a young former rider fill out VA paperwork. The man who led them into darkness, now leading them toward the light. Dr. Cooper's office at the VA clinic had become a hub of activity. Phone calls poured in from other towns, other motorcycle clubs, all asking about the Harbor Cove model. On his wall hung a newly framed certificate, official recognition from the Department of Veterans Affairs for innovative rehabilitation services. "We've got 15 more veterans in the program," he reported to Rachel Hawthorne, who was spreading legal documents across his desk. "But Reynolds is making threats. He's telling local businesses anyone who supports us will regret it." Rachel's phone buzzed with updates from her law firm. "Let him threaten. We've got federal protection now. The Justice Department sees this as a pilot program for veteran rehabilitation nationwide." The afternoon brought dark clouds and darker intentions. Reynolds' scouts circled town on their motorcycles, photographing businesses that displayed "We support veteran rehabilitation" signs in their windows. Helen Park stood defiantly in her bookstore doorway as they passed, her sign prominently displayed. "You sure about this?" Sheriff Martinez asked her, concerned for her safety. "My John was a sailor," she replied firmly. "He'd want me standing up for lost sailors finding their way home." Blackwood rode through town on his motorcycle, no longer leading with intimidation but with a different kind of strength. Former Crimson Riders nodded respectfully as he passed, some still struggling with their own transformations, but all recognizing the courage it took to change. At the diner, Sarah sat with a group of veterans, her quiet voice carrying wisdom earned through fire and sacrifice. "The hardest battle isn't against others," she explained to the men and women who'd recently turned in their cuts. "It's against the darkness within ourselves, the part that wants to stay lost, because being found means facing what we've done." The first strike came at sunset. 3 of Reynolds' men attacked a former rider outside the grocery store, but this time was different. Instead of running, the community rallied. Store owners called Sheriff Martinez, veterans appeared from nowhere, and the attackers found themselves surrounded not by fear, but by united strength. "This isn't your town anymore," one of Reynolds' men shouted as they retreated. "You're right." Blackwood stepped out of the gathering crowd. "It's not about owning territory now, it's about protecting community." Dr. Cooper worked late into the evening, handling the aftermath. 4 more called after hearing about the attack, he told Sarah. Reynolds' violence isn't scaring people away. It's showing them why they need to change. Paradise Point remained open past closing time, becoming a sanctuary for those seeking change. The coffee pot stayed full as former enemies became allies, as lost sailors found their way home one conversation at a time. "Tell us about that night in the Gulf," a recently turned-in rider asked Sarah. "We've heard stories, but..." Sarah's voice carried clearly in the quiet diner. "The Gulf taught me that real strength isn't in destroying enemies, but in saving them. Sometimes the people who seem most lost are the ones most ready to be found." Outside, Reynolds' scouts photographed license plates, tracked movements, gathered intelligence. But for every act of intimidation, the town's resolve grew stronger. Local businesses doubled down on their support, more veterans arrived to help, and the transformation that had started with one wheelchair-bound commander now moved with unstoppable momentum. "He's gathering forces," O'Brien reported, joining Sarah and Blackwood at their regular table. "Reynolds has called in favors from other hardline gangs. They're talking about making an example of Harbor Cove. Blackwood's face showed the weight of his responsibility. I led them into darkness. Now I have to help lead them out, even if they fight against their own salvation. Rachel arrived with fresh legal documents, her expression serious. Reynolds's men attacked another former member in Portland, but this time we've got footage, witnesses, federal charges ready to file. Don't, Sarah said quietly. Not yet. Sometimes the door to redemption needs to stay open, even for those who seem furthest from wanting it. If this clash between darkness and light has you on the edge of your seat, just wait until tomorrow's episode when Reynolds makes his final move, and Commander Hawthorne reveals the one truth that changes everything. Hit subscribe now and don't miss a moment of this incredible story. Tell us in the comments, which is stronger, the pull of darkness or the power of redemption? The pre-dawn darkness shattered with the sound of breaking glass and roaring motorcycles. Reynolds had chosen his moment carefully, coordinating attacks across Harbor Cove. 3 rehabilitated riders' homes were hit simultaneously, windows broken, vehicles vandalized. At Paradise Point Diner, the front window exploded inward as Reynolds himself hurled a brick through it. But Harbor Cove had changed. Before Reynolds' men could finish their assault, lights blazed to life across town. Doors opened, and citizens emerged, not in fear, but in unity. Veterans who'd been quietly watching over the community moved with practiced precision, while Sheriff Martinez's deputies responded with unexpected reinforcement from local residents. "You're too late, Jake," Blackwood's voice cut through the chaos as he rode up to the diner, followed by 24 reformed riders. "The town's not afraid anymore. We're not afraid anymore." Commander Sarah Hawthorne sat calmly at her usual table despite the broken glass, her posture radiating a stillness that made Reynolds' violence seem increasingly desperate. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," she said quietly. "Coffee's still hot if you'd like to talk instead of throw things." Dr. Cooper arrived at the scene, medical bag in hand, but today it contained more than just first aid supplies. "Got something you should see," he told Sheriff Martinez, pulling out a file. "Reynolds' military records. He served on the support vessel that night in the Gulf before the rescue. He's not just acting out, he's running from his own past." Inside the diner, Lucy calmly swept up broken glass while Sarah served coffee to the growing crowd. The attack had backfired, bringing the community together instead of tearing it apart. Helen Park arrived with fresh flowers, deliberately placing them in the broken window's frame. "My shop's next," she said firmly, "and I'll be waiting with fresh books and a veteran support poster twice as big as the last one." Rachel Hawthorne worked her phone with fierce intensity, coordinating with state police and federal authorities. "Reynolds just made a tactical error," she told Captain O'Brien. "His attacks crossed state lines. We've got FBI involvement now if we want it." But Sarah raised her hand, stopping her daughter mid-dial. "Sometimes the hardest men to save are the ones most desperate to prove they don't need saving." Reynolds's men regrouped at the edge of town, their numbers notably smaller than before the attack. Some had seen the community's response and begun questioning their path. Others remembered their own service, their own lost way, their own need for redemption. "This isn't what we signed up for," one muttered, looking back at the town. "Breaking windows, attacking homes. We're supposed to be sailors, not thugs." Blackwood rode out to meet them alone and unarmed, his cut now bearing a new patch, one that spoke of rehabilitation and redemption rather than violence and fear. "I know why." "You're angry," he called to his former brothers. "Change is hard. Redemption is harder." "But look around you. Look what we're becoming." Through the broken diner window, more transformed riders arrived to help with cleanup. Veterans worked alongside former enemies, sharing stories, showing paths forward. Dr. Cooper set up an impromptu counseling station in one corner while Rachel helped process paperwork for those ready to enter the program. "He's losing them," O'Brien observed, watching more of Reynolds' followers hesitate, looking between their leader's rage and the scene of community before them. Every act of violence pushes more toward transformation. Reynolds saw it too. His face contorted with fury as 3 more riders removed their cuts, laying them down before walking toward the diner. "Traitors!" he screamed. "You're all traitors to what we built." "No," Sarah's voice carried clearly from her corner table. "They're loyal to something deeper. The sailors they were meant to be, the protectors they can become again." The morning, sun rose over Harbor Cove, illuminating the damage from Reynolds' attack. But instead of fear and division, it revealed something unexpected. The town had come alive with activity, people cleaning, repairing, supporting each other. Every act of destruction met with twice as much restoration. "Got another group coming in," Dr. Cooper announced, watching a truck arrive with lumber to repair the diner's window. Former Marines who heard about the program. They're offering to help protect reformed members while they go through rehabilitation. Rachel discovered something in Reynolds' military files that changed everything. "Mom," she said quietly to Sarah, "he was there that night in the Gulf, not with Blackwood's unit. He was part of the support team that was supposed to go back for survivors. He froze, never went in." Sarah nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. Shame is a powerful enemy. Sometimes men do terrible things trying to bury it. If this powerful moment of community strength moved you, just wait until tomorrow's episode when Commander Hawthorne confronts Reynolds with the truth he's been running from his whole life. Hit subscribe now and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss this incredible revelation. Tell us in the comments. What do you think Reynolds will choose when faced with his past? The day progressed with tension building. Reynolds' remaining followers grew increasingly agitated as more brothers chose transformation over loyalty to their leader. Each hour brought new defections, new signs of the old order crumbling. The converted riders now outnumbered the resistors, 3-1. "He's planning something bigger," Blackwood warned during an emergency meeting at the diner. "Jake never could accept losing. He'll try to destroy everything we're building, even if it means destroying himself." Lucy served coffee. To the planning session, her voice firm. "Let him try. This isn't just your fight anymore. It's all of ours. Every person in this town who believes in second chances. Every veteran who remembers their own journey home." Through it all, Sarah sat at her corner table, a steady presence as plans were made and strategies discussed. Her phone rang constantly. More veterans arriving, more resources offering support, more lost sailors seeking guidance. "You knew it would come to this," Captain O'Brien said, joining her late in the day. "The darkness making its last stand against the light." "The hardest battle," Sarah replied, "is the one against our own shadows. Jake's not just fighting us, he's fighting the sailor he used to be, the man he's afraid to remember." As night fell over Harbor Cove, Reynolds' remaining forces gathered at their makeshift base, but now barely 15 riders remained where once there had been over 60. The others had chosen a different path, finding their way back to honor one difficult step at a time. Tomorrow, Reynolds promised his dwindling followers, we show them what happens to traitors. Tomorrow we remind them why the Crimson Riders are feared. But in Paradise Point, now repaired and more crowded than ever, a different kind of strength was gathering. Reformed riders sat with veterans, planning not for violence, but for protection. The community stood ready, united not in fear, but in determination to defend their transformation. Dr. Cooper arrived with the final piece of evidence, the complete, unredacted report from that night in the Gulf. He was on watch when the first distress call came in, Cooper explained, showing Sarah the documents. His duty was to launch the first rescue boat, but fear paralyzed him. When you took command of the second vessel, you did his job for him. And he's been running from that moment ever since, Rachel added, understanding dawning. Every act of violence, every threat, it's all been trying to prove he's not a coward. Through the diner's windows, they could see Reynolds' scouts watching, their motorcycles idling in the distant shadows. but the sight no longer carried fear. Harbor Cove had found something stronger than intimidation, the power of community, of redemption, of sailors remembering their true purpose. "Got the contingency plans in place," Martinez reported. "State police are standing by, but they understand we want to handle this our way first." Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing a familiar pattern on her coffee cup. "Sometimes the men who shout the loudest about strength are the ones most afraid of their own weakness. Jake doesn't need handcuffs. He needs to face what happened that night." The evening deepened as more transformed riders arrived, each with their own story of redemption. Thunder Collins, once Reynolds' fiercest lieutenant, now helped organize support groups for veterans dealing with PTSD. Shadow Pierce had traded his cut for a counselor's certificate, using his street knowledge to reach others still lost in darkness. "Tell them what you told me," Blackwood encouraged a newly reformed rider addressing the group, "about why you chose to change." The young man stood, his hands steady now, where they once shook with anger. "I realized something watching Commander Hawthorne. Real strength isn't about making people fear you. It's about having the courage to face your fears, to face yourself." Rachel worked late into the night, preparing documents for every possible outcome. "The rehabilitation program's ready," she reported. "Full support services, counseling, job training, everything Jake and his remaining men will need when they're ready to come in." "When, not if," Sarah corrected gently. "Every sailor finds their way home eventually. Some just take a longer voyage than others." Outside, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. Lightning illuminated the harbor in stark flashes as thunder rolled across the water. But inside Paradise Point, the light burned steady and warm, a beacon for those still finding their way through the darkness. "Tomorrow brings the choice," Sarah told the gathered crowd. "Not just for Jake, but for all of us. Between vengeance and understanding. Between perpetuating the cycle of violence and breaking it with something stronger." The night deepened as plans were made. Not for conflict, but for rescue. Every person in that diner understood what was at stake. Not just the peace of Harbor Cove, but the soul of every lost sailor still searching for their way home. If this moment of preparation has your heart racing, wait until tomorrow's episode when Commander Hawthorne confronts Reynolds with the truth that will shake him to his core. Hit subscribe now and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss this powerful moment of reckoning. Tell us in the comments, what truth do you think Reynolds needs to face to find his way back to honor? The storm hit Harbor Cove at midnight, rain hammering the streets as Reynolds' forces made their move. Lightning illuminated the convoy of motorcycles and trucks approaching from 3 directions, their headlights cutting through the darkness like attacking predators. But the town was ready. Commander Sarah Hawthorne had known this moment was coming since the first confrontation in Paradise Point Diner. "They're here," Blackwood announced unnecessarily as thunder rolled overhead. The reformed riders stood with veterans and townspeople, not in aggression but in protective unity around the diner. The building had become more than just a restaurant. It was a symbol of transformation that Reynolds couldn't allow to stand. Sarah sat at her usual corner table, unmoved by the approaching chaos. "Dr. Cooper," she called quietly, "I believe it's time for that file." Reynolds' voice boomed through a megaphone as his forces surrounded the diner. "Last chance, traitors! Return to the Crimson Riders or burn with this town!" But his words lacked their usual power. Only 12 riders remained with him now, their uncertain faces illuminated by lightning flashes. The others had chosen different paths, finding their way back to honor through Sarah's program. "You're not here to destroy us, Jake," Sarah's voice carried clearly through the storm. "You're here because you can't face what happened in the Gulf. The night you were supposed to launch the rescue boat, but fear kept you at the dock." Reynolds' megaphone dropped slightly. Through the rain-streaked windows, they could see his face transform from rage to shock. "How? Who told you I was there?" I was on watch duty, Sarah replied calmly. Blind in one eye by then from the first explosion, but I could hear your voice on the radio, making excuses while sailors needed rescue, while Blackwood's unit needed rescue. Dr. Cooper stepped forward, holding waterproof files. It's all here, Jake. The real reason you were discharged. Not for injury or trauma, but for abandoning your post when others needed you most. The revelation hit Reynolds' remaining followers like a physical blow. Some immediately cut their engines, removing patches, understanding finally what their leader had been running from all these years. You don't understand, Reynolds' voice cracked. I couldn't. There was so much fire, so much chaos. We all face moments that define us, Jake. Sarah stood slowly, her unseeing eyes somehow finding Reynolds in the darkness. Some of us go back into the fire to save others. Some run from it. But it's never too late to make a different choice. Blackwood moved to stand beside Sarah, his transformation from gang leader to protector now complete. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You couldn't stand watching us change because it reminded you of your own moment of failure. The storm intensified, but nobody moved. Reynolds' remaining men looked between their leader and the united front before them. Veterans, reformed riders, townspeople all standing together against violence, not with force but with understanding. You want to know what real strength looks like? Sarah's voice cut through the rain. It's admitting when you're lost. It's accepting help when you're broken. It's choosing to protect rather than destroy. Rachel emerged from the diner carrying more files, military records, rehabilitation program documents, paths to redemption laid out in black and white. There's still room in the program, she called to Reynolds' remaining followers. Still. Time to find your way home. Thunder crashed as 3 more riders dismounted, removing their Crimson Riders' cuts. They walked through the rain toward the diner, toward transformation, leaving Reynolds with barely a handful of men. Cowards, Reynolds screamed, but his voice broke on the word. You're all cowards. No, Sarah replied gently. The coward is the one who can't face his own failures, who builds walls of violence to hide his shame. I was there that night, Jake. I heard your fear, but I also hear it now, and I'm offering you what no one offered then, a chance to make it right. Lucy emerged from the diner carrying coffee cups, walking fearlessly through the rain to Reynolds' remaining men. You're all welcome here, she said firmly. Not as gang members, but as sailors finding their way back. The sight of this small woman offering hospitality in the face of violence broke something in Reynolds' followers. More cuts hit the wet pavement. More men chose to walk away from darkness toward the light of possibility. It's over, Blackwood said quietly. The Crimson Riders died the moment we remembered who we were meant to be. Reynolds stood alone now, his megaphone hanging useless at his side. The rain washed over him as his empire crumbled, as the walls he'd built to hide his shame finally fell away. I hear them sometimes, he whispered. But Sarah's keen ears caught the words. The voices on the radio that night, calling for help. Go back now, Sarah offered. Not to that night, but to the sailor you were before fear changed you. The protector who took an oath to serve others. If this moment of truth has moved you to tears, wait until tomorrow's final episode when everything comes full circle in a way you'll never forget. Hit subscribe right now. You don't want to miss the powerful conclusion to this incredible story. Tell us in the comments, what moment in your life defined who you truly are? 1 year to the day since the Crimson Riders first entered Paradise. Point Diner, Commander Sarah Hawthorne sat at her usual corner table, listening to the sounds of complete transformation. The morning bustle carried none of the tension it once had. Instead, the air filled with purpose and hope as transformed riders went about their new missions of helping others heal. Jake Reynolds, now fully certified as a rehabilitation counselor, organized the day's anniversary celebrations. His own transformation had become legendary, The former rebel leader now led training sessions for rehabilitation programs worldwide. Final numbers came in from the East Coast, he told Sarah, setting down fresh coffee. Every major outlaw motorcycle club has either entered rehabilitation or disbanded. The old way of life is over. Riders are choosing to remember who they were meant to be. Dr. Cooper arrived with groundbreaking news. The Harbor Cove model had been adopted as the global standard for veteran rehabilitation. His research had revolutionized how the world approached veteran healing, proving that transformation was possible for even the hardest cases. The psychiatric community finally understands, he explained, spreading his latest data across the table. Clinical treatment alone isn't enough. Veterans need veterans to guide them home. Blackwood and Reynolds worked seamlessly now, their former rivalry transformed into a powerful partnership for change. Together, they developed advanced intervention techniques that worked across contexts, helping lost sailors worldwide find their way back. Got word from the last holdouts in Florida, Reynolds reported. They're turning in their cuts tomorrow. Not because we forced them, but because they've seen what real strength looks like. Through the diner's windows, Harbor Cove showed its complete transformation. The town had become a global center for veteran rehabilitation, its streets patrolled by men who had once terrorized them. Each transformed rider wore their new purpose with quiet pride. Your mother did something unprecedented, Lucy told Rachel, as she served coffee to a gathering of international journalists. She didn't just create a program, she sparked a movement that's changing how the world helps veterans heal. Sarah moved through her busy diner, now internationally famous as the birthplace of modern veteran rehabilitation. Her simple approach to creating safe spaces had been replicated worldwide, but the original diner remained special, a place where the hardest transformations first became possible. Sometimes I look around, Lucy shared with Sarah, and can hardly believe these are the same men who once brought such fear. Now they bring hope. Captain O'Brien's veteran network had achieved its ultimate goal, creating a worldwide safety net for sailors in crisis. His teams could respond anywhere, anytime, bringing the Harbor Cove model's proven methods to those most in need. Prevention numbers are astronomical, he reported. We're catching veterans before they fall, showing them a path home before they lose their way. The day brought a steady stream of success stories. Former gang leaders now led rehabilitation programs. Once violent riders had become counselors and mentors. The transformation that had started in Harbor Cove had created a ripple effect beyond anyone's expectations. Your critics said it couldn't last, a visiting senator told Sarah. That transformed riders would return to violence. Instead, they've become the strongest force for positive change we've seen in decades. Reynolds worked with a group of international program directors, sharing the deep understanding he'd gained through his own journey. His presence alone proved the program's power. The man who had once led hundreds through violence now led thousands toward healing. Real strength, he explained, isn't in making others fear you. It's in helping them find their way back to honor, even when they think they've lost it forever. Blackwood received updates from program centers on 5 continents, each report showing the same pattern. Transformed riders becoming more effective at reaching others, creating an exponential growth in healing that couldn't be stopped. The old life is dying out, he observed, not because we destroyed it, but because we offered something better, the chance to remember what it means to be a true sailor. Sarah listened to the success stories flowing in from around the world, each transformed life adding another thread to the tapestry of healing being woven across continents and cultures. Your program saved more than just lives, Dr. Cooper told her. It saved souls. It reminded veterans everywhere that their darkest moments don't define them. As evening approached, Harbor Cove prepared for its anniversary celebration. The community center filled with transformed riders and their families, each story of redemption adding to the program's legacy. Look around, Rachel told observers. Every person here was once considered lost beyond hope. Now they're the strongest force for positive change in their communities. Paradise Point remained open late, serving coffee to celebration participants. The simple space had become sacred ground in the veteran rehabilitation movement, proof that transformation could start with something as simple as a cup of coffee and understanding. The night deepened as Sarah sat in her garden, listening to the sounds of her transformed community. The war for veteran souls had been won not through force, but through something more powerful. The reminder that inside every lost sailor was a protector waiting to be remembered. Tomorrow brings new challenges, she told Reynolds. More veterans needing to find their way home. But now we know the path. Now we can light the way for others. Harbor Cove had done more than transform itself. It had shown the world a new way of healing veteran hearts. The Harbor Cove model wasn't just a program anymore. It was a testament to the power of remembering who we were meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more incredible stories waiting for you right on your screen. If you found this tale of transformation powerful, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Click now to discover more stories that will touch your heart and remind you of the strength of the human spirit.